She was judged, humiliated, and cast aside for being poor. But destiny had a different plan for her. Tonight, you will witness a story of heartbreak, resilience, and unexpected triumph.
The rain fell softly over the narrow streets of Eastwood, a forgotten neighborhood on the edge of the city where dreams were cheap and heartbreak came free. The smell of wet dust and old iron filled the air as Aisha, a 22-year-old black woman with short, natural curls and quiet brown eyes, hurried home from her shift at a small cleaning agency. Her clothes were still damp from scrubbing marble floors, and her hands smelled faintly of detergent, a scent she had grown used to, almost like a badge of survival. She walked past the bakery window, her reflection faint in the glass. Behind the counter, people laughed over croissants and coffee, their clothes bright, their world distant. Aisha paused for a moment, then kept walking, clutching her worn leather bag tighter. Inside, there was only her bus card, a torn photograph of her late mother, and a letter she hadn't dared to open yet. From Morgan Enterprises, the company where she cleaned offices every other night. She reached the small one-room apartment she shared with her younger brother Malik, who was sleeping under a blanket patched in too many places. The room smelled faintly of old books and rain. She sat by the cracked window, opened the envelope, and began to read. Her eyes widened slowly. "We regret to inform you that your position as a temporary cleaning assistant has been terminated, effective immediately." Her heart sank. For a long moment she just stared at the words. It wasn't just a job. It was their rent, Malik's school fees, food. She took a slow breath, whispering, "I did everything right. Why?" The next morning, unable to accept it, she went back to the building. The tall glass tower that belonged to Alexander Morgan, one of the wealthiest CEOs in the country. She had seen him only from afar, a tall white man with silver hair, always in motion, always surrounded by people who moved when he spoke. He was the kind of man whose shoes cost more than she earned in a month. At the security desk, she tried to explain. "Please," she said softly, "there must be a mistake. I didn't do anything wrong." "You'll need to leave, ma'am," the guard replied coldly, without looking up. "But I just need 5 minutes. Please, just let me talk to someone." Then the elevator doors opened, and Alexander Morgan himself stepped out. The room seemed to fall silent. His sharp gray eyes swept over the lobby, then paused on her, small, drenched, holding a crumpled envelope. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice low but commanding. "She's been let go, sir. Refuses to leave." "Is that so?" he said, turning to her. "You're the cleaner from last week, aren't you? The one who spilled coffee near the boardroom door?" Her face flushed. I cleaned it right away, sir. I didn't mean—" "Intentions don't pay for mistakes. You people never take responsibility." The words cut deeper than he realized. You people. For a moment, Aisha wanted to scream, to tell him what it was like to wake up every day and fight for crumbs in a world that never saw her. But she only whispered, "I'm sorry, sir." He turned away, waving a dismissive hand. "Security, escort her out." As the guards led her toward the doors, she glanced once more at the gleaming floors she had polished every night. Her reflection looked smaller now, almost disappearing in the shine. Outside, the city lights flickered against the rain-soaked pavement. Aisha stood alone, trembling, but somewhere deep inside, something stirred, a spark, not of anger, but of resolve. "One day," she whispered to herself, They'll know who I am. And as the storm rolled over Eastwood, Aisha walked into the night, unaware that her path and Alexander Morgan's path would cross again, in a way neither of them could imagine.
The rain fell softly over the narrow streets of Eastwood, a forgotten neighborhood on the edge of the city, where dreams were cheap and heartbreak came free. The smell of wet dust and old iron filled the air as Aisha, a 22-year-old black woman with short, natural curls and quiet brown eyes, hurried home from her shift at a small cleaning agency. Her clothes were still damp from scrubbing marble floors, and her hands smelled faintly of detergent, a scent she had grown used to, almost like a badge of survival. She walked past the bakery window, her reflection faint in the glass. Behind the counter, people laughed over croissants and coffee, their clothes bright, their world distant. Aisha paused for a moment, then kept walking, clutching her worn leather bag tighter. Inside, there was only her bus card, a torn photograph of her late mother, and a letter she hadn't dared to open yet. From Morgan Enterprises, the company where she cleaned offices every other night. She reached the small one-room apartment she shared with her younger brother Malik, who was sleeping under a blanket patched in too many places. The room smelled faintly of old books and rain. She sat by the cracked window, opened the envelope, and began to read. Her eyes widened slowly. "We regret to inform you that your position as a temporary cleaning assistant has been terminated effective immediately." Her heart sank. For a long moment, she just stared at the words. It wasn't just a job. It was their rent, Malik's school fees, food. She took a slow breath, whispering, "I did everything right. Why?" The next morning, unable to accept it, she went back to the building, the tall glass tower that belonged to Alexander Morgan, one of the wealthiest CEOs in the country. She had only seen him from afar, a tall white man with silver hair, always in motion, always surrounded by people who moved when he spoke. He was the kind of man whose shoes cost more than she earned in a month. At the security desk, she tried to explain. "Please," she said softly, "there must be a mistake. I didn't do anything wrong." "You'll need to leave, ma'am," the guard replied coldly, without looking up. "But I just need 5 minutes. Please, just let me talk to someone." Then the elevator doors opened, and Alexander Morgan himself stepped out. The room seemed to fall silent. His sharp gray eyes swept over the lobby, then paused on her, small, drenched, holding a crumpled envelope. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice low but commanding. "She's been let go, sir. Refuses to leave." "Is that so?" he said, turning to her. "You're the cleaner from last week, aren't you? The one who spilled coffee near the boardroom door?" Her face flushed. I cleaned it right away, sir. I didn't mean—" "Intentions don't pay for mistakes," he interrupted sharply. "You people never take responsibility." The words cut deeper than he realized. You people. For a moment, Aisha wanted to scream, to tell him what it was like to wake up every day and fight for crumbs in a world that never saw her. But she only whispered, "I'm sorry, sir." He turned away, waving a dismissive hand. "Security, escort her out." As the guards led her toward the doors, she glanced once more at the gleaming floors she had polished every night. Her reflection looked smaller now, almost disappearing in the shine. Outside, the city lights flickered against the rain-soaked pavement. Aisha stood alone, trembling, but somewhere deep inside, something stirred, a spark, not of anger, but of resolve. "One day," she whispered to herself, "they'll know who I am." And as the storm rolled over Eastwood, Aisha walked into the night,
unaware that her path and Alexander Morgan's path would cross again, in a way neither of them could imagine.
The day Aisha returned to Morgan Enterprises, the city skyline gleamed like a wall of glass and gold. She stood at the foot of the building that once made her tremble, the same marble floors she used to mop now shining beneath her shoes, though this time her reflection stared back with quiet confidence. She wore a simple navy blue dress, neat but modest, her hair tied back. She carried only a folder, her invention plans, and a calm she didn't fully feel. At the front desk, the receptionist looked up politely. "Good morning, ma'am. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," Aisha said. "Aisha Williams. I'm here to meet Mr. Morgan." The receptionist typed her name, smiled, and handed her a visitor badge. "Top floor. He's expecting you." As the elevator climbed, her heartbeat echoed in her ears. Every ding reminded her of that day, the shouting, the accusations, the humiliation. Her palms were slick, but she straightened her shoulders. "That Aisha is gone," she told herself. "Today, I walk as an equal." When the doors opened, a secretary led her to a wide glass office overlooking the city. Alexander Morgan stood with his back to the door, staring out at the skyline. He turned when he heard her steps. For a moment, he just looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly, searching his memory. "Miss Williams," he said at last, extending a hand. "Congratulations on your proposal. I read your file this morning. Impressive work." Aisha hesitated before shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his smile polite, professional, detached. He truly didn't recognize her. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan," she said softly. He motioned for her to sit. "Tell me," he began, adjusting his cufflinks, "what inspired your idea for this purification system?" Aisha took a breath. "Where I come from, clean water isn't something you take for granted. I've seen children sick because the wells are poisoned, families walking miles just to find a drop worth drinking. I thought," she paused, meeting his gaze, "maybe if I couldn't change their world, I could at least change their water." Something flickered in his eyes, a faint trace of discomfort. He leaned back in his chair. "That's noble," he said, clearing his throat. "And personal, I assume." "Very," she replied simply. For the rest of the meeting, they discussed the technical details of her project. Alexander spoke with authority and charm, the same commanding presence that had once terrified her. But now she noticed the man behind it, the exhaustion in his eyes, the loneliness in his carefully measured tone. When the meeting ended, he offered her a contract to join the mentorship program. "You'll be working closely with my R&D team, and if your prototype succeeds, Morgan Enterprises will fully fund the distribution." Aisha stood, taking the contract in her hands. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan," she said quietly. "I won't waste this chance." He smiled faintly. "I don't give chances easily, Miss Williams. Make sure you earn it." As she turned to leave, he added, almost absently, "You remind me of someone, a maid I once employed years ago. She had the same eyes, strong, defiant. Strange how faces stay with you." Aisha froze for a moment but didn't turn around. "Perhaps she taught you something important." "Perhaps," he replied, watching her go. When she stepped out of the office, her legs trembled. She had faced him again, not as the broken woman he discarded, but as someone standing on her own ground. Downstairs, Malik waited outside the building, grinning from ear to ear. "Well, how'd it go?" "He doesn't remember me," she said, smiling weakly. "But maybe he will, one day." "You want him to?" Malik asked. "No," Aisha whispered, looking up at the tower that bore his name. "I want him to change, even if he never knows why."
As they walked away, a small sense of peace settled in her chest, but deep inside, she also knew their paths were far from over. Because soon, fate would force Alexander Morgan to see the past he had buried.
The next morning, Aisha arrived at Morgan Enterprises before sunrise. The lobby was quiet, bathed in the soft gold of dawn filtering through the glass walls. She paused for a moment, looking at her reflection on the polished marble floor, the same reflection that had once belonged to a maid, now walking in as a professional engineer. She clutched her small bag and whispered to herself, "You belong here now." When she entered the R&D department, curious eyes turned toward her. The room was filled with whiteboards, glass partitions, and sleek equipment humming with quiet precision. A group of engineers huddled around a prototype. A tall woman with sharp eyes approached. "You must be Aisha," she said, crossing her arms. "I'm Clara, head of development." "Yes," Aisha said, smiling. "It's an honor." "We'll see if it stays that way," Clara muttered, half joking. "Follow me. You'll be assisting with the filtration model testing." Despite the cool welcome, Aisha threw herself into the work. Her background wasn't formal, but her practical experience, fixing old water pumps in her village, building makeshift systems from scraps, made her innovative in ways the team didn't expect. By lunchtime, Clara leaned over the desk, scanning the data. "This adjustment you made, it doubled the efficiency." "It's simple," Aisha said. "You just let gravity do most of the work instead of the pump." Clara blinked. "You taught yourself engineering?" Aisha shrugged. "Necessity is a good teacher." From that day, whispers spread through the office. The new assistant with unpolished manners, but brilliant ideas. That afternoon, Alexander walked into the lab. Conversation stopped instantly. His presence filled the room like a silent storm. He wore a dark gray suit, his jaw tight, his gaze sharp. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said, scanning the group. "I came to see the progress myself." When his eyes landed on Aisha, something flickered again, faint recognition, still unclear. "Miss Williams, I hear your model saved us 3 weeks of testing." "Yes, sir. Just a small adjustment." "Small things make the biggest differences," he murmured, watching her closely. "Keep it up." Clara shot Aisha a surprised glance after he left. "He never compliments anyone. What's your secret?" Aisha smiled softly. "Maybe he's just learning." Days turned into weeks. Aisha worked late nights refining her design, while Alexander began to visit the lab more often. He would ask her questions, sometimes about her ideas, other times about her life. "You said you grew up in the countryside." "Yes, in a small village where people shared what little they had." "Must have been hard." "It taught me compassion," she said quietly, "even when others forget what that means." He frowned slightly at her words, as though they stirred something uncomfortable in him. One evening, after everyone left, he walked past the lab again. Through the glass, he saw Aisha alone, sitting under the harsh white light, adjusting a valve with patient hands. Her face was calm, tired, determined. For a moment, he saw another image flash in his mind. A younger woman crying on the marble floor of his mansion, clutching a broken plate as he shouted at her. He froze. No, it couldn't be. He stepped away quickly, shaking his head, but the image wouldn't leave him. The following week, Morgan Enterprises hosted a charity gala, a grand event where the company's top figures mingled with the elite. Aisha had been invited to present her project prototype. She hesitated to go, but knew this was her moment to show what her idea could do. That night, she entered the ballroom wearing a simple emerald dress, nothing extravagant, but elegant in its quiet way. Her hair framed her face naturally, and her expression was calm, yet radiant. As she approached the stage, conversations around her softened.
Alexander stood near the podium, greeting investors. When he turned and saw her, his expression faltered, surprise mixed with something deeper, unspoken. Aisha presented her invention with grace and conviction. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she spoke. This isn't just about technology. It's about dignity, about giving people what should never be considered a luxury: clean water. Applause filled the hall. Even Alexander clapped slowly, his gaze fixed on her. After the event, he found her near the balcony, looking out over the city lights. "You spoke beautifully tonight," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan. You remind me of someone I once failed to understand, someone who deserved better." Aisha turned her head slightly, her eyes glistening. "Then maybe it's time you finally do," she whispered, walking away. He stood there, speechless, watching her disappear into the crowd, and for the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't define: regret.
The night after the gala, Alexander couldn't sleep. He sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights flickering through the glass like restless ghosts. The applause from the evening still echoed in his mind, but so did her voice. "Then maybe it's time you finally do." He poured himself a drink, his reflection shimmering in the window. Something about Aisha haunted him. Her voice, her eyes, the quiet sadness that lingered behind her calm. It felt familiar. He searched through old records on his tablet, unsure what he was even looking for. Then, suddenly, a name caught his attention in an archived employee list. Aisha Williams, housemaid, Morgan Estate, dismissed 7 years ago. His hand froze. He clicked the file. And there she was, a younger version of the woman he'd just seen at the gala. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. "Oh my God," he whispered. "It's her." The next morning, Aisha arrived early again, unaware of what he had discovered. The sun filtered through the high glass walls of the lobby, painting long golden streaks across the floor. As she walked toward the elevator, she saw Alexander waiting there, unusually early, standing with his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she said softly. "Aisha, we need to talk," he said quietly. "In my office." She hesitated, but nodded. Inside his office, the air was heavy. He gestured for her to sit, then paced near the window. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," she said calmly. "People like you don't see maids. You look through them." He winced. I didn't recognize you." "Of course not," she said, eyes glistening. "You never looked at me long enough to remember my face." Her voice didn't carry hatred, only truth, and that truth cut deeper than any accusation. "That day," he said, voice breaking slightly, "I thought you'd stolen from me. You thought a hungry woman taking leftovers was stealing. You fired me in front of everyone. Do you know what that did to me?" Silence. The city below seemed to vanish, replaced by the echo of their shared past. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "Truly, I was arrogant, blind. I see that now." "Apologies don't erase pain, Mr. Morgan," she said, rising slowly. "But they can start to heal it." She walked toward the door but stopped. "You asked why I came here. It wasn't for revenge. It was to remind you power means nothing without compassion." And then she left. That night, Alexander sat alone in his mansion, the same place where he'd once humiliated her. The same marble floors, the same chandeliers, the same cold silence. But this time, everything looked different. He walked through the kitchen, remembering her standing there, crying quietly as he shouted. The memory hit him like a knife. He placed his hands on the counter, his breath trembling. "What have I done?" He called his assistant. "Cancel tomorrow's meetings and arrange a visit to the Morgan Foundation site in West Haven. I need to see something."
The next day, he arrived at the Foundation's charity center, a sprawling building dedicated to helping struggling families. Children ran across the courtyard, laughing. Volunteers handed out food. Among them stood Aisha, in a simple white blouse, handing out meals with a radiant smile. She saw him and froze for a second, unsure why he was there. He approached quietly. "You built this," he said, looking around. "With help," she replied. "People believed in what I was doing." "You've done more good than I ever have," he said softly. "I came here to learn from you, if you'll let me." For a moment, she just looked at him, the same man who once represented everything cruel and cold in her life. But now, he looked different. "If you're sincere," she said finally, "then start by listening, really listening." He nodded. "I will." That evening, the two of them sat on a bench outside the center as the sun dipped below the horizon. The laughter of children echoed in the distance. "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said, "but if they hadn't, I wouldn't be who I am now, and maybe you wouldn't either." He smiled faintly, eyes misty. "You gave me something I didn't deserve. Forgiveness." "No," she whispered. "I gave myself peace." As the light faded, he looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, and in that moment, the walls between billionaire and maid, power and humility, guilt and grace, began to crumble.
The next morning, the skyline over the city glowed gold, streaked with soft clouds drifting above the skyscrapers. Inside Morgan Global's headquarters, something had shifted. The employees sensed it, attention replaced by quiet curiosity. Alexander Morgan had arrived early again, but this time, his expression wasn't cold or commanding. He looked human. He called a company-wide meeting, something he hadn't done in years. The large conference hall filled with staff from every department, executives, interns, janitors, and kitchen workers, all murmuring nervously. When Alexander walked to the podium, silence fell. "I built this company with the wrong foundation," he began, voice steady but filled with weight. "For years, I believed success meant power. I believed people's worth came from their wealth. I was wrong." Whispers rippled through the room. He paused, meeting the eyes of his employees. "Some of you were mistreated. Some of you were overlooked. I know I can't undo what's been done, but from this day forward, Morgan Global will be rebuilt on a different principle: compassion." He motioned to the front row. Aisha stood there, quietly watching. "This woman," he said, his tone softening, "once worked in my home. I treated her unfairly. I fired her for something that wasn't a crime. It was survival. Today, she's built a foundation that feeds thousands. She's here because I asked her to help me change this company." Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Aisha stepped forward, her voice calm and clear. "Change isn't a speech, it's action. We'll start by creating a fund for underprivileged workers and their families, and every employee, no matter their rank, will have a voice in shaping this new chapter." The crowd broke into soft applause. For the first time, Alexander didn't feel like a man being admired. He felt like one finally learning what leadership truly meant. Later that evening, after the hall had emptied, Aisha stood by the tall windows overlooking the city, the glow of street lights shimmering below. Alexander approached quietly, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. "I didn't think they'd listen," he admitted. "They didn't need to listen," she said, turning to him with a gentle smile. "They needed to see." He looked down, his voice quieter now. "Aisha, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't," she replied. "Just keep going." But as she turned to leave, he spoke again, his tone different this time, almost fragile. "You saved me.
not just my reputation. Me. Aisha stopped. No, Alexander, she said softly. You chose to save yourself. I just reminded you where to start. In the weeks that followed, the change was visible everywhere. The cold marble halls of Morgan Global slowly filled with warmth. Community boards, volunteer events, food drives organized by employees themselves. The company partnered with the foundation Aisha had built, creating programs that helped local families rebuild their lives. One morning, Alexander visited one of those community centers himself. Children ran to greet him, something that would have terrified him years ago. He knelt, laughing awkwardly, as a little girl handed him a hand-drawn card that said, "Thank you for helping Mama." He looked at the card for a long time, then smiled through the sting of tears. That evening, he invited Aisha for dinner, not at a lavish restaurant, but at a small, cozy cafe near the foundation. Candlelight flickered on the wooden table between them. "It's strange," he said, stirring his tea. "I used to think fulfillment came from owning more. Now I find it in giving. That's because you finally learned what wealth really is. It's not money, it's meaning." He nodded, his gaze soft. "You've given me both." Aisha smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "And you've proven people can change." The wind outside brushed against the glass. For a long moment, they sat in silence. Two souls who had once lived worlds apart, now sharing peace neither of them had known before. Weeks turned into months. The Morgan Foundation expanded. News outlets began to call Alexander's transformation the billionaire's awakening. But he didn't care about headlines anymore. What mattered was the work, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing others rise. One late afternoon, he stood at the new foundation site in West Haven, watching construction crews raise the final beams of a new shelter. Aisha walked up beside him, holding a folder of blueprints. "It's almost done," she said, smiling. "It's just the beginning." He turned to her, sincerity radiating in his eyes. "Aisha, would you stay? Not just as a partner in this mission, but—" He hesitated. She waited. "As a friend?" Aisha looked at him for a long moment, the once cold man who had become humble, the man who had hurt her and then helped heal her. She extended her hand, smiling gently. "Friends," she said. "But don't forget, you still owe me a lifetime of good deeds." He laughed, shaking her hand. "Deal." As the sun set behind them, casting golden light over the new foundation, Aisha and Alexander stood side by side, no longer maid and master, no longer sinner and victim, but two people who had found redemption through grace.
Years passed. Seasons folded into one another, and the story of a maid and a billionaire faded into something larger, a quiet legend of transformation, whispered through communities and boardrooms alike. The Morgan Aisha Foundation had become a symbol of hope. Schools were rebuilt in forgotten towns. Women once silenced by poverty were now entrepreneurs. Children who had never dreamed of education now wore uniforms and carried books with their names written proudly inside. And at the heart of it all was Aisha. One warm afternoon, she stood on the porch of a newly built learning center, a structure painted in cheerful shades of yellow and cream, surrounded by mango trees swaying in the humid breeze. Children played in the courtyard, their laughter blending with the sound of chalk scraping on boards and the distant hum of life. Aisha, now in her early 30s, carried herself with quiet confidence. Her short, curly hair had a few silver strands, but her eyes, gentle, deep, and filled with light, had not changed. A young teacher approached her, smiling. "Miss Aisha, they're asking if you'll read them one of your stories again."
She chuckled softly. Of course they are, she said, walking toward the small crowd of children gathered beneath the shade of a neem tree. She sat on a wooden bench as the children formed a circle around her. She opened a weathered notebook, the same one she used when the foundation was just an idea scribbled on paper. Once upon a time, there was a man who thought wealth meant gold, and there was a woman who taught him that true wealth comes from the heart. The children listened, wide-eyed. Some giggled, some leaned closer, and one little boy whispered, "Miss Aisha, was that man real?" Aisha smiled faintly. "Yes," she said softly, "and he's the reason you all have this place today." That evening, as the sky dimmed to amber, Aisha returned to her office at the Foundation's headquarters, a modest but elegant building bearing two names engraved in bronze, Morgan and Aisha Foundation, for Humanity and Hope. She walked through the hall lined with framed photos, children's smiles, community gatherings, ribbon cuttings, and newspaper clippings from around the world. One photograph caught her attention, Alexander Morgan standing beside her during the first gala years ago, both smiling under the soft glow of chandeliers. Her gaze softened. "You'd be proud of this, Alex," she whispered. Far away, in a quiet coastal villa, Alexander Morgan sat on a balcony overlooking the ocean. His once perfectly combed hair was silver now, and his expensive suit had been replaced by a linen shirt. He no longer ran Morgan Global. He had passed that legacy to a new generation of leaders who had grown under Aisha's principles. He spent his days writing, reading, and occasionally visiting the Foundation projects. That evening, as the sunset reflected on the waves, his phone buzzed. A message from Aisha. "The new center in Abadan opens tomorrow. You should come. They'd love to see you." He smiled, typing back with slow fingers. "Wouldn't miss it." The next day, the crowd at the Abadan Center erupted in applause when Alexander arrived. His steps were slower now, but his eyes still carried the same warmth that had once surprised everyone who knew the ruthless tycoon. Aisha met him halfway across the courtyard. They didn't need words, only a smile, the kind born of forgiveness and years of shared purpose. "You made it," she said. "I told you I wouldn't miss it," he replied, grinning. Together they walked to the stage. Behind them a banner read, "Building Futures, Restoring Dignity." Aisha took the microphone, her voice steady and full of grace. "Today isn't just about a building. It's about what we can build in each other. Hope, trust, compassion." She paused, glancing at Alexander. "Once upon a time, we were enemies. Today, we are proof that forgiveness can rebuild anything, even a heart." The crowd rose to their feet, clapping, not for wealth, not for fame, but for the simple truth she had spoken. As night fell, they sat together beneath the stars, the hum of crickets surrounding them. Alexander looked out at the horizon. "Funny," he murmured, "for a man who once owned everything, I've never felt richer than I do now." Aisha turned to him, eyes glistening. "Because this time, you didn't buy it. You earned it." He smiled, closing his eyes for a moment, peace settling over him like a prayer answered late but right on time. Years later, a marble statue stood in front of the Morgan Aisha Foundation's headquarters, a bronze rendering of two hands clasped together, one dark, one light. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Wealth fades, compassion endures." And every child who walked through those doors learned the story of a woman once cast out for being poor, and the man who learned that saving another soul could also save his own.